Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. Recently some people asked me about my Photoshop workflow in post-processing, and since I'm a bit lazy, what I did is I simply recorded the whole process of the last image I did, and did a little voiceover, so that way I sort of walk you through all the simple steps that I go through that are very thorough. And the thing that is fun and that I want you to understand kind of is that this process is the same whatever the image is. Maybe some steps will be longer or take longer or less long depending on the image, but the actual step itself, I will always go through it for whatever image I'm working on. So the project I've used for this image is a project I did actually a teardown of, so that you can actually check the video as well if you want. I highly suggest you do so that you actually have a better understanding of the scope of the project and also understand how I ended up with that image compared with the other one. So that will be it, I think. So yeah, let's get started. So here I'm using the V-Ray denoiser and denoising my refraction and reflection pass in order to get like denoised version that are a bit cleaner than the noisy ones. So I'm using the V-Ray denoiser tool directly from the desktop. I'm then loading everything, the EXR and all my passes into Photoshop, and I can start playing around with it. Here I'm just loading my folder structure that sort of gives me the whole structure I need in order to work. Here's the ambient occlusion that I'm adding. I'm adding a LUT from Kim Amland that is also a good base in order to get like nice looking contrast quite early in the process. Still a bit of ambient occlusion. Here, one of the main thing I wanted to work on was the sort of charred wood that was a little bit too dark, so there's like a lot of adjustment going on with this one at some point. Here's the specular pass that I use generally for reflection, so this helps in bringing back details in the reflection, especially for all the sort of plaza and the interesting sculpture that I have and the foliage. So this is very, very important to like have this pass in order to bring more detail and punch in the overall image. I'm doing everything in black and white for now because I have an idea of the color palette that I want in the end, but I don't need to tweak it for now. Here's the normal pass that I use for selection, and that helps in creating better passes in selection for my burn and dodge and like adding a little bit of detail and some sort of like more interesting contrast. Here I'm using the diffuse filter back into my charred wood pass in order to again have more detail into the final texture. Here I was just opening for the cutouts in order to sort of start using it. So nothing very special. I guess here I was choosing them from my library. So I had like some vegetation thing that I wanted to add in the foreground because that was how I imagined it. I didn't want to do it in 3D because I knew that in post I had the necessary foliage to do like a nice corner slash foreground. So here I'm just mixing basically 3 different foliage that I have that comes from Forest Digital. So these are like very qualitative ones that I like using every time I need to do some post-production. So here I'm just like blending the 3 of them together so that it sort of like looks a little bit better because they're not supposed to be used exactly that way. Here's the YouTube video I was listening to. Back into Studio S&M in order to download some more 2D cutouts that I will be using. I'll also use most of the guys from VizUpper. So there's like 2 main resources I have: Mr. Cutout, VizUpper, and Studio S&M. So that's 3 resources. Kind of boring to watch, but I don't want to edit the video. But I basically will jump between all these and sort of grab the ones I need. I have a local library, but I tend to always scroll. Like I only keep the very important ones that are kind of rare and that I use quite often or that I know will be used for really very specific things. But when it comes to more basic urban animation, I usually just go back to those libraries and download again the ones I need. Here I wanted to go with a very simple look. I had like in mind someone in the foreground on the bench, and then just starting adding people in the background and in the interior, because we have like this sort of overcast feel, so I wanted something to feel very simple and not overcrowded or whatever. So here I have my little selection. I'm not sure it's the final one. For sure it's not the final one. I will have like many of them and testing, but I don't think I've added any extra after these. I have my little rule that I put in order to know what's the size of the cutout I'm supposed to have. Here it might be a little bit, might look a bit wrong, the guy in the foreground, but he actually is like, there's a couple of steps up between the place where the kids are and the foreground, so that's why he looks a little bit higher. I think I've deleted, like here I'm added some people on the right, but I think later on, I sort of removed them because it feels a bit too packed, and they were not really, like this kid is actually gonna disappear later down the road because it was not necessary to have that many. Adding people is quite important. I've done a video, I've done like an article about how to insert them like a really long time ago, but I've done a short video about like concepts of how to place them. So I think it's important to, well, have a look at this, or if you're not aware of how it works, but there's like a lot of tensions that you have to have in mind, and also like some stuff that you can, in terms of information. So here I'm like showing this sort of, trying to suggest this exhibition space, the fact that several people can use, that there's like a lot of kids. At some point I've added someone in the stairs on the left because they're not that legible. So once you have someone walking up the stairs, suddenly it makes more sense and you start to understand it better. Also, I wanted to have this sort of emphasis, like really small, but kind of still noticeable on the sculptures. That's why I've started creating small scenarios around the sculpture in the background, and having like kids playing around it, or like just one little kid looking at it. I don't remember what I ended up choosing, to be honest. So here I'm just like placing them. At the moment I'm placing them completely, not randomly, but I'm still putting them in the right folder, because you can see I have like people glass and people normal. So people glass is like filtered with the refraction pass so that they automatically are inside the building and have reflection on top of them. They still need a little bit of refining, but overall they already fit a little bit better. Here I'm like finalizing sort of like family thing. I'm deleting the guy on the right because it was too much. And I'm adding some stuff on the left. Yeah, I guess I needed some extra people in the end. I was looking for actually people walking up the stairs because there was like a necessity for that, I think, in order to sort of make this small space a little bit more understandable, because the lighting was not exactly as clear as I would have hoped. Here I'll be playing a little bit around with it in order to finalize how I want it to look, and right now I'm just masking stuff in order to feel a little bit better how they're going to integrate in the overall image. Here I'm just playing around with this and like completely disabling the reflection so that I can understand better how the inside looks. And here I'm adding like just a little bit of a motion blur just to have this something a little bit more interesting, and that sort of makes the motion more legible than the actual person, because what I want is just people to understand we can walk up. I don't want them to look at the actual person walking up because it doesn't really matter. So here I'm just doing a little bit of dodge and burned, which is something that is very useful when you want to finalize the integration of your people or in cutouts. Just creating the shadows. When it comes to simple shadows like that for a rough, how would you call that, draft, I don't even use the action that I have. I have like one that is very interesting and very easy to use, but I generally use it more for like harsher lighting. When it's more soft light, I think it's easier to actually paint the whole thing instead of play around with the masks, because otherwise you end up having like weird calculation, or not calculation, but like weird results. I actually forgot here. You can see maybe here I duplicate the pass or like my layers so that I can have like more coarse shadows that are like much darker. So I end up doing that with a hue saturation adjustment, but it can be done with many different options. Doesn't really matter. One thing that I do also is to lower the contrast overall of the people, because they tend to, for some reason, have a lot of contrast, which is very annoying. So generally I will lower the contrast and re-up it with the LT that I'm using. Here again, I forgot this girl, so I've added some shadows. I think I'm kind of done with people with this. Here I'm just upping the reflection and changing it a little so that it has like a little bit more interesting look. I'm generally playing with glass in normal mode, screen mode, and overlay mode, and that way I can sort of play around. Here I'm just grabbing a backdrop that I had back from the project that I want to put in the backdrop because it's a bit empty right now and it doesn't really look good. So I'm just using my alpha pass. I think I'm shifting the edge at some point because it looks bad. Yep. At some point I remember I got lost about where the... That's the thing, is like instead of putting it in the background, which is what I should have done, I did it slightly differently. Here you can see I've used the mask in order to shift the edge and have something like the foliage looking a little bit better. Here I'm using my Z depth pass in order to just create a little bit of like aerial perspective in post. So I put it as a level on top and I sort of just go with it. There's a couple of small adjustments that I needed to do with this reflection again. Here I'm basically, like fine-tuning the reflection and refraction in order to, like, having the screen refraction set to screen brings like a lot of light, and basically I just like hide it and put it back locally where I need to have like a more brighter scene interior. Here, I think I actually gave up on the 3D part that was in the back and started inserting some 2D cutouts in order to make my junction a little bit better between the two. And this is where, for some reason, I struggled a little to find on what level not what layer and group they were, because there was some weird adjustment going on. And it took me like maybe 2 minutes to exactly isolate what was going on. Because I have always like the specular and ambient occlusion on top that sometimes can pose some problem. So that's a sort of debugging that I'm doing now. So I'm basically redoing all my masks locally in order to finally find what I needed to erase and finally be able to have my my backdrop going on top of this. Then I'm just placing it kind of roughly because I don't really, it's not even like the right quality. If I had time, I would just put it in like Topaz AI or whatever, just to get like a slightly crisper look, because it really, like the discrepancy in resolution is a little bit it's not catching your eye that much, but it is too much for what I would like it to look like. But I was too lazy, I guess, so this is what it ends up looking like. Here I'm trying to put potentially other like elements in front of the building, but I really wanted to keep it like very legible. So that's why in the end I just keep them in the background, and I keep my very low plants and vegetation in the foreground, or in the scene in general. Here I'm changing the sky, which is like an overcast sky, pretty simple one. Still need a bit of refining on how, like the levels, because it's a little bit too dark. I'm trying like other options. Generally, I will throw in like 3 or 4 skies that sort of fit the requirement, and then I'll start adjusting them. I'm not even looking at the colors yet because it doesn't really matter. You can most of the time change the color quite easily of a sky. Here you can see that I noticed there was like a little fuck up in the way I erased the mask earlier, so I'm just fixing that. Then I'm starting like just creating a dodge layer in order to have like a little bit more interesting foliage and sort of emphasize it. Here, I'll just my saturation pass that I want to sort of start tweaking in order to have a more homogeneous saturation. What I wanted to go for, because it's an overcast scene, is that actually in overcast scene you have quite a bit of saturation in your foliage, and this is the sort of look I wanted to go for because I wanted to have this feel of very nice looking foliage despite the sort of quite weird weather. So I'm still tweaking colors. It really doesn't look good at the moment, so I'm just like retrying stuff. Even though I said earlier that I had a color palette in mind, it was more like broad ideas. I didn't have like, for some reason, because I really just took like, I just did that for fun. It took me about an hour, I think. I really just wanted to have fun with this image. Here I just see that I forgot to hide those people properly. But normally I would have many more references for colors, but in that case I had like a broad idea, so I knew I would be able to sort of pull it off by just taking the right amount of time to tweaking it. Here I'm just changing again the overall colors because it was a little bit too yellow and I was not really happy with it, so I'm just changing it. I think also the sky is like a little bit too blue. I'm not going to change it right now, but I'm changing it a bit later because I remember I was not really happy with it. Here you can see I completely forgot there's a couple of things that the tree was going on top of the head of the guy, and the 3D thing that I had before was not properly handled, so I'm just like clone stamping the thing in order to hide it a little. It's clearly not a very clean job, but considering it's just a couple of pixels in the background, it's not very important, so it's okay. Usually what I'll do is to bring the thing in camera raw in order to fix it and fix some like little details. But what I ended up doing before that I actually don't do all the time, is that I brought it back into the Nick collection analog effects or something like that, because I wanted to use it again. I generally, like, sometimes I will use it if really I'm not able to get exactly the look I want manually, but it's not all the time. Here for some reason there's like, the color palette is okay, it's just it has, well, there's a couple of things that is not good, but it has a sort of too real and natural look, if I may say, that I was not really happy with. So what I did is taking it back to the Analog Effects Pro and use a couple of extra small filters that sort of make it blend a little bit together. I had like a small bokeh thing that is very subtle. I know it's not like, what's the word, physically or optically accurate, but still I sort of try to make it fit what it should look like. Here I'm trying just other types of colors filters, and I end up with the one from the beginning because it's subtle enough so that I don't feel it's too overwhelming. And then I'm bringing it back into camera raw and changing. I usually add like a little bit of clarity, change the highlights, etc. So here's the final image. Compared with what I just uploaded, there's small adjustments that I did. First one is that I've actually copied this element here in order to have like a better texture. A couple of things also is that I've duplicated my background and added it here because it was like white and a bit looking shitty, and also here because I had like this sort of weird square. I've changed maybe a little some color adjustments here. There was like a little bit too bright, so I've downgraded it a bit. And also one big thing that I changed from the just earlier version is that the overall lighting was a little bit downplayed, so that basically I would still have this sort of warmth that is interesting, but I wanted to play a little bit more up the texture and the saturation of the vegetation. So that's the sort of thing I ended up with before and after. So that's it for this image. As you can see, nothing super fancy. It's very straightforward. The workflow is very simple to go through. It's just like step-by-step process, and that sort of leads you to the final image pretty efficiently. The overall image took about 40 minutes, I think. And the thing to understand is actually fun is that about 10 to 15 minutes actually were just dedicated to finding the right cutouts. This is actually something I am comfortable with and okay with, because I like optimizing most of what I can do. But as I said in another video, I like this idea of like this sort of serendipity that happens when you browse through an actually bigger library of cutouts than you might need, because sometimes you will end up finding something that is very important for your image and that you wouldn't have found like if you filtered too much. Another thing that I wanted to mention was regarding the fact of revisiting commission project. There are like a lot of underestimated things that come out from doing so I wanted to mention them. The first thing that I mentioned for the teardown is that revisiting your own images is actually going to help you to get better, because you can better assess your progress and you can make better images that you can use in your portfolio. One thing though that is interesting is that then you can take those images that you made and send them to your client as a sort of like freebie that they will have. There was one thing that you need to do prior to doing this that is very important, is that you need to put into your contract that you allow yourself to actually use their project to make extra images as long as you credit them, and that you're like allow yourself to use them for your own marketing, for instance. Sometimes they won't accept, sometimes they will accept and don't care, because one way to sell it is to actually tell them that they're going to get extra images for free that they can use on their website. One thing that is interesting for you, on top of just learning better, like how to answer a brief, etc., is that it will actually help you in giving some sort of excuses to get back to your client and tell them, look, I've done this, I hope you like it. And I hope you like it, you can use it for your marketing, etc., and I hope we can work together again. One thing that is interesting for that is that first you're sort of like helping your client having more stuff to show. You're helping your client and making sort of them happy because they're getting free stuff and nobody like will complain about getting free images. One thing also that is interesting is that sort of can revive potentially like a business relationship if, for instance, you haven't talked to them for a while, so that way you can tell them, hey, I'm here if you ever have like commissions, but just don't say it that way. And generally speaking, they will probably come back with like, oh yeah, if they like the image you did, they will potentially come back with commissions that they would have maybe given to someone else. Maybe they would have given them to you anyway, whatever. It's always good to sort of have this sort of conversation. It also shows that you care about their project. So of course, do it for like projects and clients that you actually liked working on, or that you saw potential for it that maybe it didn't go well. It's actually a good way of sort of like righting a wrong. If you did something that didn't really go well, but you know you have like the potential to make something better, you can show them, actually explain them that you were not happy with the way things went and that you would like to like a sort of second chance to sort of like explain them your process and maybe have something that will work out better this way. And one thing also that is interesting is that by showing them like another version that ideally is better than what you did earlier, you can show them like the sort of actual quality of your work, and you can better showcase them the sort of style that you were going for and the sort of like reasons why you thought that image would have been a better fit than the image you went for earlier. So for instance, in the case of the image that I showed here, I knew even when I finished the image that there were some issues with the lighting and the coloring in the final image. So by showing this image here, what I can do is to tell them, look, this is what I think we should have gone for. And that way I can also use that as a sort of reference later, telling them, remember that thing where we have like a sort of similar system and similar situation now. And here you have like this reference that I did especially for you. Know that you can see why it would actually work well for your project right now. And that way you have more weight in the conversation and you can better lead the discussion about like the creative direction of the project, which is a very comfortable situation to be in. So that will be it for now. I hope you learned some interesting stuff in this quite lengthy video. And I invite you to find basically a job you would like to revisit or a client you would like to work with again and sort of do some extra images. Of course, as I said, double check that in the contract. They won't be like appalled by you coming back to them and be like suing you or something like that. But just find like open-minded people that would be very happy to just have extra images and that would potentially be happy to rework again with you. And I think that's a good way to sort of tie again some links with people you want to work with and have like stronger business relationship. So that will be it for now. Hopefully you learned some stuff and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers guys. Bye.